Or the member for Maitland.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise to speak on the St John's College Bill, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the visitors in the gallery there, some of whom I've met personally and others who I've had representations from. I think this whole bill really speaks to the need for a greater culture of respect and trust across all institutions that deal with young people, particularly when they're in that age from puberty through to young adulthood, where they are testing barriers around their sexual freedoms and their other freedoms, testing institutions, testing authority figures. It's interesting today, I've been here already down in the House speaking on other legislation around relationships between staff and school staff and students. These are issues that are across not just universities but into our schools and into other institutions across our community. We all hope that this bill will improve the culture and modernise the operation of St John's College at the university to bring it up to speed with what our expectations are from the community from the 21st century. And interesting to hear my colleagues, not just in this debate but in all debates, talk about, for those of us who've been lucky to go to university, what a formative time that has been in our lives, and how important it has been to our development as human beings. And I note the contribution by the member for Ku-ring-gai, particularly on that comment there. It's very clear that there is a need for change, not just at St John's College, but that is within the purview of this place to make some changes. How did we get here? We all know about the events of 2012, but there have been other events going on throughout that time, and after a number of those such incidents, the college approached the government and requested formal legislative changes to the 1857 Act, and this bill will seek to enact those reforms. I do note that St John's made their submissions for reforms to the government back in 2014, and I'm pleased that after 3 years we've got there. I know there are sometimes big delays in getting governments to move on this, but I think that it's important that we are here, and the work that the Johnsman alumni and the Catholic Church and the college have put into coming to some agreement on these bills. This bill is very important, because at the end of the day there's one thing I've learned in my short time in Parliament, and that is that we can legislate whatever we like, but we cannot legislate cultural change. We cannot legislate for people to respect each other. We cannot legislate for people to be genuine in their dealings with each other and authentic, and to legislate for trust. These are things that have to be built over time, and sometimes, unfortunately, they come from a place of deep crisis when people are looking for some leadership and also some direction to take them through on the path. And I think that it is something that has been very good in this process to see the participation of all the players genuinely in that process to advocate for change, for the best. And we've had the government, we've had the opposition, Labor and the Greens, of course, and but everyone working together to try and ensure that we have a document that doesn't just enshrine some legislation, but the process of getting it through that crucible is actually one that engenders real change in student experience of life in college. This bill will reduce the number of members on the college bill from 19 to 13. It's hoped that will hopefully make things a bit more manageable. I'm very pleased to see that a female clerical member can now be appointed to the council. I think that's important. Also around the powers to act. I think I spoke to the members from the church last week, was about how do we put these powers in such a way that it is not open to one party taking full control, because we know that sometimes having a consultative role is not necessarily one that creates the true power sharing that we're looking at, to ensure that not one or the other has the power. So that, I think, has been addressed in this. I think it's important when we talk about governance to really encourage a development of diversity in the membership of those organisations. I understand the desire for a maintenance of tradition and ritual. That's really important, but it's also important that where those traditions and rituals routinely excluded a particular group of people, that we need to act to address that, to change it. I want to pay a particular tribute to the member for Summerhill. I note my colleague, member for Lakemba and Shadow Minister's comments and that he read out her comments on this bill. It is really important. She has been a particular champion for this for many years, but very strongly since her time in this place. And also my colleague, the Shadow Minister for Women, the Honourable Sophie Kotsis. I've also received correspondence from the Johns Manvers Association who've outlined the position of that. Labor takes the concerns and contributions of all stakeholders in this very importantly. It's important to ensure that you retain the unique identities of the college, but at the same time the governance must be modernised to deal with changing views of what is appropriate behaviour. You know, none of us in this place remain untouched by the Me Too movement. None of us can be blind to power imbalances and the devastating consequences that are lifelong for those who are victims and survivors of coercive, controlling behaviours, whether sexually motivated or in other realms of power. These are things that not only cause people to nearly lose their lives, such as has happened, but also lose themselves, lose periods, years of their lives in recovery from these traumatic events. This is what we all need to be working towards. This bill doesn't arise out of a vacuum. The incidents that occurred at St John's College are not isolated. There's been a growing campaign led by women's officers and student activists across all universities in Australia to reform the cultures of these colleges. Labor has stood in solidarity with these activists and launched the It's Time for Action campaign, which Jo Halen from Summerhill and Sophie Kotsis from Canterbury and I were very strongly engaged with these students for. We met with many students. In fact, when the Minister for Prevention of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault went to put together her sexual assault strategy, we said this is an issue that needs to be part of that as a whole of government response. This isn't just about education, it is also about the prevention of domestic violence and sexual assault. Last year, the Human Rights Commission completed a comprehensive survey into the prevalence of sexual assault and sexual harassment at our universities, and I commend also the university for the work getting Elizabeth Broderick, the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, into colleges to review their operations. I am very serious about taking action to make our universities, and especially the residential colleges, safer. And Labor has been campaigning with students to ensure there's been mandatory consent training for staff and residents at colleges. Once we get these governance issues right, let's start looking at what the objective of that governance is to actually change things on the ground. A standard and accessible sexual assault reporting model that recognises the rule of law must be part of this, and to provide some access to specialist services for the victims of sexual assault on campus, so that there is no longer these students being left on their own. One of the recommendations made by the Human Rights Commission was to ensure that there was a strong and visible commitment to action from university leaders, and St John's should be commended for stepping up and showing this, for actually demonstrating a commitment to change. And I'm hopeful that this new governance structure will lead to good outcomes for the students at the college and the wider university. I understand the concerns from different sectors, and I think other speakers have mentioned that, you know, when we are negotiating such a complex issue, we need to be respectful of those views and to try and do our best to come to an agreement. And that's why I'm pleased that the Minister's presented amendments that are supported by all to try and work towards that kind of an outcome. Mr Temporary Speaker, can I ask for a small extension of time, please?
The member for Maitland is seeking an extension of time. Is an extension granted? Extension is granted.
There are other colleges in the University of Sydney that have had issues. St Paul's, we know, the current Vice-Chancellor of the University, Dr Michael Spence AC, has said that St Paul's had a deep contempt for women, and in 2018 our society should not accept any institution that could be said to have that attitude. Now, I'm not saying, and I would never contend that that is the same at St John's, But I think it is clear from these kind of statements, from the need for this bill, for what we have seen in that Human Rights Commission survey, that there is definite and clear need for change. The government, I'm hoping, will release their sexual assault strategy early this year. I think it's waiting for the Royal Commission to come back with its final report. And I agree that this does have impacts from the Royal Commission, because some students in our colleges, maybe only for a few weeks or months, but will be under 18 when they go into there. There is a duty of care, I believe, in that. And so this bill has to be seen necessarily as a first step in a comprehensive approach of addressing sexual assault on campuses, in colleges, in our universities. There clearly must be a cultural change, but how do we start that? And I think it really does come down to respect. That is our most fundamental need for change in this. And I would put to all of the colleges and all of the universities, respect starts way before a student arrives at your doors. And that's why one of our signature pieces of policy for Labor is around respectful relationships training from the very earliest periods of school. Because it's no good trying to teach a child of 17 or a young man or woman of 18 about respect, even at 13 and 12. These attitudes, these ideas, these understandings of how people interact with each other and how they demonstrate respect to each other start from the earliest human interactions we have. And the earliest point really at which we as the state have to try and influence that for a positive outcome is from kindergarten. And that's where I think we need to be looking. Culture doesn't change with legislation. I urge everyone to work and continue to work within their organisations to improve that organisation. I think it was the member for Lakemba who talked about what do colleges want to be known for. And I would think that it was for excellence in academic standard. It would be excellence in helping students to achieve their potential. Let's not have more of this, but let's make sure that we don't have more of this because it's not there, not because we haven't addressed it, which has been the story of the past for so long. The church, the university, the college, the legislators, all of us have a role to play, but so do our students. I urge you to work with them to ensure that they are across the changes and that they feel included in this, and we start to develop a culture of respect for one another, for trust, for genuine dialogue. I thank you all for the work you've put into this, and I commend the bill to the House.
I'd like to thank the member for Maitland. We're in the second reading debate.